this morning talked about bias response teams at over 200 universities. He didn't say so, but they amount to the Red Guard. They induce struggle sessions. Many of these offices require people to write statements of their commitment to ideals of social justice, particularly diversity, inclusion, and equity, including self-reflective statements of how they've fallen short in the past sometimes. Not only are these requirements political litmus tests, at least potentially, for hiring, the compelled confessions they sometimes contain can be potentially useful for firing too, should somebody later step out of line. Even he said he's a racist. This isn't just in our universities. Law societies, many corporations, even some cities now have diversity officers. And the diversity training industry in the United States alone is above a $10 billion a year industry. This is an industry that produces no tangible product whatsoever. And almost none of what it does is supported by evidence in its favor. Some of what it does has evidence against it. It may proceed from good intentions, but it ultimately exists to evangelize for critical social justice, instruct in critical theory, and induce individual and institutional compliance, and it works. Large corporations such as Google and the BBC have fired employees based on the basis of complaints couched in social justice terms. These often follow from social media, outrage induced by articles written in popular media venues like BuzzFeed and Vox, which have dedicated themselves to the project of mainstreaming critical methodologies. Bigger media outlets have taken up the charge too. "Why can't we hate men?" was a headline in the Washington Post. It was written by the editor-in-chief of a feminist academic journal of rather high standing. "White women, come get your people," was in the New York Times following the 2018 midterm elections. Other major companies get called to account for their products. To just pull one example among many, Macy's recently found itself at the center of an outcry that began with one offended person on Twitter. They had to cancel the product line and publicly apologize for producing a plate that showed portion sizes in relation to jeans sizes, which was considered fat shaming. Online platforms themselves increasingly ban and block and otherwise punish users who produce content that can be deemed offensive, as Peter pointed out, even by proxy. YouTube regularly demonetizes videos it seems to have transgressed some standard. These are sometimes seemingly arbitrary. Facebook has become so vigorous in its censorship that years-old posts that are being read out of context by its algorithms occasionally result in account suspensions and bans. And Twitter has updated its rules to ban all kinds of speech, in particular that which they call dehumanizing language for religious groups, as well as gender-critical feminism, and the words of all those who do not accept trans people's stated gender or even sex identities. This effectively means that handfuls of activists, or the most affluent and politically active sectors of society, or the internal cultures of a handful of our corporations, like Twitter, Facebook, can censor social media, which is sort of the new public square. Social justice activists are very visible on social media, and they're particularly keen to punish people who are influential within the arts and within media. Calls for the punishment of artists who have spoken against or stepped out of line with social justice are often referred to, as you've heard now, as cancel culture. This is a chilling practice that involves the utter destruction of someone's career or reputation, if possible, for something she might have said decades ago, even as a teenager. The black actor Kevin Hart was forced to step down as host of the Oscars, for example, when tweets containing gay slurs, old tweets, were discovered. The actor Matt Damon incurred online feminist wrath by saying that sexual assault occurs on a spectrum and describing a pat on the butt as different than rape. Game show host Mario Lopez was pressured to apologize by an online mob who was outraged by his view that parents shouldn't uncritically accept a 3-year-old's self-defined gender identity. Tennis superstar Martina Navratilova was mobbed online for arguing that it's not fair for trans women tennis players to compete against natal women. Feminist Meghan Murphy was permanently banned from Twitter for saying that men are not women. Feminist giant Germaine Greer was declared not a feminist for saying something to the same effect. This is, I think, my favorite one. Slate magazine even recently published an article insisting that Robin DiAngelo's white fragility has a whiteness problem. Because mostly white people, who are DiAngelo's explicitly intended audience, engage with it, and according to them, they do so that they can become what critical race theory now calls good whites. It's not good to be a good white. Examples aren't limited to these. I get emails literally every single day. It's quite depressing, talking about yet another walk of life that's been infected by social justice and critical methods. Rock climbing, hiking, knitting, craft ceramics, Catholicism, Lutheranism, American Zen Buddhism, the Southern Baptist Convention, personal finance, law societies, New York State and city schools, Dungeons and Dragons. The examples actually are kind of nearly endless. Nothing can be safe from a critical theory because nothing can be perfect. So what's happening then, as my friend Mike Nana over here with the camera says, where Marxist revolutionaries believed that power was tied up in wealth, and so step one was to seize the means of economic production. Their immediate successors, the critical revolutionaries that we have today, believe power is tied up in how people think and how we communicate. So step one is to seize the means of cultural production, like education, media, art, language, and religion, including the limits of free exercise for these. Put another way, social justice is yet another in a long historical line of ugly and self-serving power grabs, allegedly designed for our own good.